Hi guys. So far I don't think I've made any of the engineering vehicles on the railway, and I picked up this Bachmann RNAD van a few weeks ago. The Talyllyn has one, but it doesn't quite look like this. It's a really well detailed model, and unlike the Skarloey coach a few weeks back, this one has a nice fine paint job. I'll crack on by removing the couplings. Being NEM pockets, these just pull out. And the wheel sets also pop out. The first job is to remove the RNAD lettering. At this stage, my plan was to actually keep the current paint job. So, to remove the letters, I soaked a cotton bud in isopropyl alcohol and went at it like a bat out of Chester Zoo, or whatever the phrase is. Oh, also, after a suggestion by a viewer, I'll be sticking up whatever products I'm using on the screen. So at least I look like I know what I'm doing. Even if I don't really. It's surprising how much of a difference the letters made. So now I need to start by chopping bits away. And I've just noticed these lovely looking hook and chains. They'll be going in a bit. I'll start with the brake system. As Talyllyn Van 70, the railway's XRNAD van, doesn't have them by the looks of photos I've got here. So I'll start by cutting them away. Until I realise that they just about pull out their little sockets. And that's not only the brake lever on the front, but the brake arms below deck as well. And that made the job much more pleasant and clean. Whilst Van 70 doesn't have a brake system, it does actually have the remains of it, in the form of the lever's housing. This is a moulded part connected to the lever, so I need to carefully cut away the lever itself. I did hope after a nice surprise with the brakes that the chains on the ends may pull out as well, but they didn't, so I'll cut them away. It doesn't really take much force to get through these, which is good news for the portion of viewers here who feel sick watching my cutting techniques. I then glued the brake piece back on with super glue. I probably could have used liquid poly, but for this I just wanted a fast-acting product. Whilst Van 70 is missing a lot of the original pieces, like the brakes, it also has additional TR parts to scratch build. This comes in the form of a fiddly little steel buffer beam on each end. I'm going to be making these out of styrene strip. I'll first cut a piece that will match the width of the vehicle. You can see here that I've also removed rivets from the ends of the body to give myself something level to glue the styrene onto. The flat piece on the buffer beam is spaced away from the body of the van by, well, spacers. These were also made out of styrene and were a nightmare to glue on, so forgive me that they're wonky. You'll hardly see them anyway when it's finished, because the model's at my house. I cut each spacer with angles to match the prototype. Not that you can see them. With those set, I then glued the main buffer beams onto the spacers. This time I chose liquid poly as I wanted to adjust it so it sat level. The liquid poly also fuses the pieces together, so I'm going to assume that if it does break, it will be on the body's connection, not the buffer beam itself. Then again, it'll still be broken either way, so yet again I'm not the winner. So I finally decided to give it my own livery. This will be prototypical, but it'll have two benefits. The first is that it'll match my other models, and secondly, it means I can weather the model with chipped paint. The first coat for the paint stage is grey car primer, as this resets the body back to a uniform colour. Then, using the airbrush, I'll apply a couple of coats of number 82 Earth Brown by Miniature Paints. This will be the base coat that will show through the worn paintwork. That needs to fully cure before the next step, so I'll leave it for a good 6 hours or so to be safe, and to fulfill real-life commitments. The model is then coated with a paint chipping medium. I've said this before, but I'm pretty sure this is just non-pressurized hairspray judging by the smell. Once again, this needs time to fully cure. This time I chose to go and incubate tonsillitis. The van is then given a couple of coats of its final livery. This is a custom colour and it's the same I used on a heritage stock. Because of the amount of raised detail on this model, it's important to spray it from various angles. If you don't, then you'll miss the parts where the raised detail protects it from the spray. I can now start to chip the paint. I'm carefully following reference photos for this to make it look more random and natural. The process is simple here. I use a cocktail stick and dip the end in clean water. The cocktail stick is then used to scratch the surface of the model. The paint will flake away, leaving those areas showing a wooden base. This is a personal choice how much you want to chip the paint. I quite like the look of this effect, so I probably take more off than I should, but it's my model and I like doing it. It really is the best way to replicate chipped paint, as the edges come off very jagged and random. And so, I begin the long, painful process, mostly because I have tonsillitis, remember, of painting the black ironwork. It dawned on me here just how much black metal is on this model. The raised detail here is also difficult to make a tidy job of, as it's quite fine, even if it is raised. So I'm going to use my old technique of painting towards the edge to minimise the risk of painting down onto the join-in bodywork. The ends are just as fiddly to paint in, with the added bonus of steps to contend with. To be fair, the steps are probably the easiest bit to fill in on the ends. The struts down the centre were hell on earth. I then decided that it was going to be a messy job trying to paint in all the black below deck. So I chose to spray it. The body needs to be masked off to protect it from the overspray, and I tend to do this in 2 steps. The first is a carefully placed strip along the edge of the body, which can be difficult on models like this with a lot of surface detail, so I use a fine tool like these tweezers to push the tape into place. The second step is just to cover the rest of the body up. I use a strip of kitchen roll with tape on the edge to seal it in. The underframe is now getting a good couple of coats of black primer. Being a primer, it covers really well and should be quite durable. It was nearly done here, but something wasn't quite right. Ah yes, the roof. TR Van 70 has a single smooth roof, where this has a vent piece, so it needs to be gone. I stressed about this, and even set up the Dremel to remove it, but it turns out that actually it's a separate piece that connects using little pins, so the knife makes short work of it. Cutting through the pins also means that it doesn't leave much of a hole. The whole roof is then smoothed down with a file to get rid of any excess glue where the other piece was joined at the pins. Then I used, well, it wasn't a filler, as I ran out. It's actually a pavement textured paint, but acts like a filler because it's so thick. This was applied over the cut spots and surrounding area, and left to dry for a few hours. Whilst the roof set, I set to work painting up the new buffer beams. These look to be an off-white sort of creamy colour, which are not usually ideal for covering up dark colours like the black undercoat. So I did this in a number of thinner coats until it was uniform. The other positive bonus from thinning the cream down with water is that it won't have as many brush marks in the finish, which I hate. I also needed to paint the extension brackets on the buffer beams, which was one of the more fiddly jobs today, especially with the need for a couple of coats. The roof has dried, so I'll sand it down with a bit of wet and dry sandpaper. The pavement paste sands really well, even if it does have a grainy texture when applied. Sometimes I get lazy and use wet and dry like normal sandpaper, without the water. But oh boy does it make a difference when you do. It does, by the way. You should definitely always use water. The roof is nice and uniform, so I need to mask it off ready for spraying. This is the same technique as the underframe, but it was much easier this time because there's less bits in the way. I've been using grey car primer as the top coat for the roofs in this series, and it looks okay. It's probably due to the fact that I don't use grey car primer as the TR body colour, which some people do, so it's a nice variation. It's also nice to see that the holes in the roof are no longer visible. I'm trying to add tiny strips of rust between the extension brackets here. It's a delicate process to get right, as it's quite a contrast with the cream, so could easily be too much. I also gave the whole bracket a diluted wash of the same rust, which dulled it down a bit. With the rust out and the reference photo still on my screen, I dropped rust in the appropriate locations, such as along the roof struts. By the way, I'm making these part names up. I have no idea what they're actually called, but you can see where I'm adding the rust and they sort of look like struts. Adding it as a wash also helps to flow it into the tighter, smaller areas such as this so-called strut. The wash is also applied over the axle boxes, though I kept washing it down so it will be quite subtle when it's done. And finally, the van's hit with a black wash. This type of body really lends itself to a wash as it's got so much detail. Like the rust, this is only a diluted wash this time, as I wanted just an aged look. The ends have the same treatment, though as is the way with this build, the ends are more difficult to apply it to, because of all the detail. The van's dry so the wheel sets are popped back into the axle boxes. And there we go. Another perfectly fine ready to run model gets his street value axed purely to feed my obsession. Though I'm really happy with the look of this one. I think it's the paint chipping. I really like paint chipping. I think it gives a really good used look to the models. The buffer beam seems to stick out a bit. I mean visually, not physically. It's meant to physically stick out. So maybe I need to give it a slightly darker wash. But then again, they kind of look like that on Van 70 anyway. I don't know. Good news as well. Not only have I now got copious amount of NHS standard penicillin for my tonsillitis that I keep talking about, but I've also got all the wood for the layout. So have a guess what's on next week's video. To be fair, I think I've said at the end of a number of videos now, but this time the wood's actually in the train room, so it's a goer, folks. Oh, also, I've got another engine to build. Bet you can't guess which one that is. It'll be an interesting build, but not yet. Layout's next. So thanks for watching, I trust you learned something. If you didn't, go watch it again. Right, I'm off for my pills now. For my tonsillitis. Did I mention I had tonsillitis this week? I've got tonsillitis. Cheers.